If you're a Christian, you probably believe that God answers prayers. In fact, many of you will say He faithfully or even always answers prayers. This means that when you sit down and pray, you have every expectation that God will answer you. In fact, the idea that He does so, and that He does so reliably, is an idea you've been trained to believe in, and it's thoroughly intertwined with your understanding that God is a loving Father who cares about your needs. But I'd like you to do something in light of this belief. Try to remember something you've recently prayed for, or an issue in your life that you might pray for in the near future. Picture how this issue impacts your life or the life of others, what the various outcomes of it might be, and exactly what you would want God to do in the situation. After you've given this some thought, then I'd ask you a simple question. What would it look like if God did not answer your prayer? Now, your first reaction might be to find this exercise distasteful, and to feel that, by considering such a possibility, you are somehow being disrespectful to God. After all, God does answer prayers, right? So why waste time trying to visualize something that won't ever happen? What's the point other than to fill your head with doubts that tarnish your image of a heavenly Father who always wants the best for you? Well, the point is simple. Unless you can form a clear picture of what would happen if God did not answer your prayer, then you really have no picture of what it would mean if God did answer it. And thus your claims that God answers prayers are meaningless. And I'm not using that word for hyperbolic effect. I'm stating in very clear terms that your idea of God answering prayer has literally no meaning, no definition at all. To understand how obviously true this is, all we have to do is consider any other scenario in which you hope something happens. For example, let's say you had applied for a job. Can you describe how you'd know you'd got it? Well, you'd know because the place you applied to called you back and offered it. Easy, right? But now here's a real brain buster. Can you describe how you'd know that you didn't get it? You would just have to hear back that you did not get it, right? The most ambiguous possible outcome would be if you heard nothing back at all. At best, this would mean you did not yet get the job, and even then you'd have the sense to take a long enough span of silence as a no answer. The point is, there's no possible way to explain how you'd know you got the job without having an equally clear understanding of what it would look like if you did not get the job, or at least hadn't gotten it yet, and this is the case in any coherently expressed scenario. Anytime you hope for or expect something, it's because there is more than one outcome. And it's simply impossible to have a coherent understanding of one of the outcomes without by implication understanding the opposite outcome. In fact, hoping for something is actually hoping that the opposite does not happen. So if you can't describe a negative outcome, then you really don't even know what you're hoping for. This is almost insultingly obvious, but considering how Christians approach prayer, it seems like it needs to be said. Seriously, right now try to describe anything you might possibly hope will happen. I hope to get to work on time. I hope he goes out with me. I hope my team wins the game. I hope it's sunny tomorrow. You simply can't do this without the opposite outcome entering your head on at least some level, or at least being clearly obvious the moment you try to think about it. In fact, the negative outcome is clearly built into the concept and sometimes even grammar of your expression of hope. In fact, to reach the point that you can't describe the negative outcome, you'd have to willfully obscure your understanding of the situation so badly that you no longer have a clear understanding of what you want anymore. For example, think of the mental gymnastics needed to avoid confronting the possibility that you didn't get a job, or to tell yourself that you always get a job. To sustain and defend this statement, you'd have to change the phrasing of your claim to something along the lines of, "Businesses always answer me," then water this statement's meaning down to the point that it became a pointless description of every possible response or lack of response. This is what Christians must do to avoid confronting the possibility that God has not answered a prayer. In order to sustain and defend the statement, "God always answers prayer," Christians have to label literally anything that happens as a yes, no, or later answer, despite the fact that God literally says nothing. This idea of an answer encompasses so many outcomes that it literally means and for many more devout Christians, this thinking interferes with their ongoing understanding of and interaction with reality. If you'll allow me to shift analogies, it's as if they sit on the couch watching their team play a sports match, but can't tell what it would look like if the team lost. Obviously, if they can't tell you that getting fewer points means their team lost, they can't form the contrasting idea that getting more points means their team won. So to obscure one idea, they'd have to obscure the other. and the only way they can maintain this lack of clarity is to consciously try to avoid understanding anything they see happening on the screen. Thus, they watch their team play without consciously tallying the score. In fact, they try not to see the score by, putting a piece of tape on the part of the screen that displays it or something. Or maybe by just trying not to grasp what the numbers mean. So they just sit on the couch watching players running around throwing a ball, feeling vaguely victorious no matter what happens. Regardless of which basket the ball goes into, or whether it's just being fruitlessly passed around the court for hours at a time, they would always feel like it was somehow what their team wanted. If you ask why they felt this way, they would tell you that their team was a great team, and they trusted that the team had a plan and knew what it was doing. And if you asked why they trusted this, they would tell you that they had watched several games that proceeded exactly as this one, and each time they had the same generally victorious feeling about what was going on. They could probably give you vague anecdotes about several times they felt the ball had gone in a good direction so often that it was clear their team was regularly victorious, and they would feel very strongly that in all their life the team had never let them down. But why do they think the team had never let them down? If someone doesn't know how to define losing and thus has no conceivable way to define winning, and they maintain this lack of clarity with a general trust that everything the team does is winning, then what was the ground level reason for ever establishing this trust to begin with? This, Christians, is what it looks like to outsiders when you say God answers prayers, but you can't clearly explain how you conclude a prayer has or has not been answered. It appears that you have no criteria for evaluating the outcome to your prayers, and that instead you just condition yourself to feel vaguely victorious on behalf of God no matter what happens. We strongly suspect that this has been the case over the course of your time as a believer, and that your trust in God comes not from anything He did, but from the fact that other people instructed you to trust in Him. Of course you, like any believer in any religion, might claim you can tell me stories of times you know God worked powerfully in your life. But it wouldn't be useful for us to spend time splitting hairs over anecdotes. Instead, I would ask you to do something, being very honest with yourself in the process. The next time you pray, think carefully about what you're praying for, and try to form a clear understanding of what it would look like if God answered your prayer. And be equally clear about what a non-answer would look like. For example, if you pray for God to heal an illness, then if you're still sick an hour later, God did not answer your prayer. If you pray for sunny weather on the day of a church picnic, then if it is rainy or cloudy, God did not answer your prayer. Now be conscious of and try to avoid the temptation to fuzzy your definition of what a sunny versus cloudy day looks like, or what being healed means. And by the way, you can't dodge this by saying you can't expect something specific because God has a bigger plan, because how can you distinguish apparently random things happening because of God's bigger plan from actual random things happening? And how are you supposed to conclude that God answers prayers if you're too baffled by His infinite wisdom to evaluate anything He does? So avoid all these excuses, and to the best of your ability, make your picture of each outcome as clearly distinguishable from the other as possible. If you do this and consistently find yourself getting clearly positive results for a variety of things you wouldn't expect to see happen naturally, then you can start to develop a meaningful idea that yes, God is faithful to answer prayers. If, however, you don't form a coherent idea of what you're hoping God will do, and are prepared to later make excuses about how God works in mysterious ways, answers with yes, no, or wait, or has a purpose for letting you stay sick or making it rain at your picnic, then you're literally praying with the expectation that anything might happen as a result. You fail to acknowledge what an unanswered prayer will look like, because deep down you know random things will happen after you pray. And since God won't alter reality in answer to your prayers, you make sure to alter your prayers to accommodate reality. If you're a believer, you might want to stop and ask yourself why you really do this.